The other thing that we want to think through is the literary context. And when we think about the literary context, we want to think about kind of concentric circles here. So we want to think through the immediate context. So this is primarily at the paragraph level. How do the words and sentences contribute to the meaning of the paragraph? And so we're going to spend in later videos the bulk of our time kind of at that level. But we want to think through, again, words make up sentences, sentences make up paragraphs. That's the immediate context, what's going on around the passage. The other thing, let me just back up though to this. One of the things that we do though is we, even within a paragraph, oftentimes we can rip a sentence out of that context and misinterpret it and misapply it. One of the perfect examples that I think of is in Philippians 4, where it says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we rip that verse out of context, and we can use that in America for football games, and for God's going to be on my side to help me be able to beat, whoever in this game, and so on and so forth. But the immediate context was actually given in the context of Paul's contentment related to his financial support raising. And so that's just one example of that. Then we want to think through the chapter or the unit. How does this paragraph contribute to the chapter or unit, and vice versa? And so one of the things I want to make a point of here is that there are things that the author is doing that are larger than just maybe this particular sentence within this particular paragraph, but what's going on in the bigger unit, maybe that chapter, is going to contribute to how we can read and interpret the smaller paragraph in those even more detailed sentences. Then we want to think through the book. How does this paragraph and then the chapter or a unit contribute to the book, and how do the main ideas of the book contribute to the chapter units in the paragraph? And so again, this goes back and forth here to where, how does this unit contribute to the whole, but how does the whole contribute to the unit? And so there are certain things that are happening within the whole book, themes that are in the book, and different ideas that are being presented in the book that are going to contribute to the meaning as we get into the smaller units in the chapters and in the paragraphs and in the sentences. And then we want to think through, how does the whole book, how does the canon, the whole Bible, inform my reading of the passage, and vice versa. Again, we want to think about how the book contributes to the whole canon. We want to think about how the canon contributes to my understanding of the whole book as well. And so where there's some maybe harder to interpret passages that may again be challenging to us, even theologically, are there clearer passages in the whole of the canon that the canon teaches that could contribute to our understanding of what may be going on in the smaller units? And then, so I wanted to walk through a couple examples here very briefly. One, as we think about this sinful, the Jesus anointed by the sinful woman in Luke 7, one of the things that I do is I use the Biblical Theological Study Bible. And there's an online version that I use as well. But what it does is it does this work for me. And as you can see here in the very top of this, that in this particular story takes place in a larger unit, in a larger section in Luke. And so it's the Galilean ministry section. And Jesus began his public ministry in Galilee by demonstrating his power in both words and deeds, and by forming a restored community of God's people. The teachings that follow outline the behavior that should define this people. After initially presenting Jesus' power and vision for the community, Luke shares responses from different parties, and we'll see that in a minute. Jesus' followers recognize him as the Messiah, so there's an identity issue going on, while those who oppose him challenge his authority. And so, again, it then comes down into a smaller unit, more at the chapter level. even though it doesn't break it up necessarily perfectly by chapter, but this is more of the smaller unit before we get to the paragraph level. But here in this section in Luke, Luke is walking through, at least how the Biblical Theological Study Bible puts it, responses to the gospel. The first two stories in this section echo the programmatic passage in 4:14 through 30. The healing of the Gentile ruler in 4:27, so going all the way back to again chapter 4, anticipates this story of the healing of the centurion's servant in 7:1 through 10. And the care of the widow in 4:25 through 26 anticipates the raising of the widow's son in 7:11 through 17. These two stories lead into yet another discussion of Jesus' identity in 7:18 through 35 and his inclusion of outcasts, 7:36 through 50, which is our story. Two sets of parables further explain accepting and rejecting Jesus and his message in chapter 8 before Jesus returns to discussing the true family of God in 8:19 through 21. So again, what's going on here is they help us to see what's going on in the surrounding stories and even how those surrounding stories relate all the way back to the larger unit. And then there's an explanation here in 7:36 through 50 of what's going on. Before we move on to the next context, the redemptive context, I wanted to look at one other example of literary context, and it comes from the book of Ephesians. The book of Ephesians, you may be familiar with the fact that it's really broken up into two main sections. And so if I were to study Ephesians 4, again, using my Biblical Theological Study Bible, or you could do this with other study Bibles, or you could find other outlines even online. And essentially, this is an outline they're using here, but then they're providing a bit more context and explanation of what's going on in each particular section. But if we were to look at, again, this book of Ephesians, one of the things I want to bring out is here it says in this section of Ephesians 4:1 through 6:20, which is the second half of the book, it says, conduct of the church within Christ's cosmic reconciliation on the basis of what God has accomplished. And here they're pointing back to 1:3 through 3:21. Paul instructs his readers how to live out their calling. In other words, what it's saying here is that there is an intricate tie to from what's happened in 1:3 through 3:21, the first half of the book, which is essentially the essence of the gospel and what God has done in reconciling unbelievers to himself and really also Gentiles into the church. And in light of what he's done, Paul then instructs his readers how to live out their calling. In other words, Ephesians 4:1 through 6:20 is a response to all that God has done in the first half of the book.